Welcome to Inside the Studio. I'm Evan Sanford. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a very special program for you today. My guest is Lieutenant Colonel Mary Flatley, who recently finished an 18-month term as the commanding officer of the Wounded Warrior Battalion West, based in Camp Pendleton. She served in the Marines for 23 years, and before that, Mary graduated from the University of Redlands in 1997. Well, she's back at the University of Redlands pursuing the Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. Mary, welcome to Inside the Studio.
Thank you, Evan. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with how you first got involved in the armed forces, especially more than 30 years ago. I can't imagine it was easy. What stood out to me was how you responded to a major that you reported to with the two words, challenge accepted. How did you overcome all the obstacles that you faced?
Well, I enlisted when I was 18 years old, and I was active duty in the Navy for 4 years. I was in the reserves for 7, and while I was in the reserves, I went to the University of Redlands. While I was at Redlands, I wanted to be a naval officer, and one of the majors in my reserve unit challenged me, and he said, "Yeah, you can't handle the Marine Corps. That's why you're getting commissioned in the Navy." And I was like, "Okay." And so I went to the OSO office, Officer Selection Officer's office, submitted my package, and went to Officer Candidate School, and here I am today. So
let's talk about the transition from the Navy to the Marines. What was that like, and how did you deal with that?
Well, it wasn't that difficult because, again, I was enlisted in the Navy, and then when I came in the Marine Corps, I was an officer. I think the transition from being enlisted to an officer was more difficult than Navy to Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps is a department of the Navy, because we're in the Department of the Navy. They call it the men's department, but you know how that goes.
Well, so what were you doing in the Navy before you transitioned to the Marines? I know you were in the reserves in the middle of that, but what were your duties before and after that transition?
On active duty, I was stationed aboard a ship, and I was a shipboard electrician. I was an electrician's mate. When I was in the reserves, I was an electrician's mate, and then I transferred to being a religious program specialist because I wanted to get promoted in the reserves. And my rate as an electrician's mate, they weren't promoting, so I did the transition to that.
You've served in a variety of service and leadership positions throughout the world. You moved to Madrid, where you met your husband, while studying strategic and tactical war planning. You also served a 13-month deployment in Iraq, just to name a few things on your resume. So talk about some of the more impactful moments you've had over your long and illustrious career.
I will, serving in Madrid was very impactful because, again, I did meet my husband there. And I went there single and came home married. That goes. But serving in Iraq was definitely a changing moment for me. Not only because of the fact that we were there in an area of operations of wartime, right? But the good things that we were doing as well, because we were building schools, we had the AFPAC cans, we had people sending in backpacks for the kids that were going to school. So we're doing humanitarian service as well as being there for the reason why we were there.
When and how did you find out that you'd be transitioning to the Wounded Warrior Battalion, and what responsibilities were you asked to take charge of?
I think it was like August of 2017 that I was going to be going there as a commanding officer. It's one of those things that wasn't in my wheelhouse at the time, and so I did a lot of studying because the Wounded Warrior Battalion, we take care of our amputees, our Marines that have TBIs, the PTSD, the mental health. Ill, cancer, and so a lot of, you have to change your mindset. When you're a Marine, it's, basic orders, and at the Wounded Warrior Battalion, you have to find a balance of that, because the Marines that are there, you don't want to be too rough on them. A lot of times, it's like suck it up and move on. Well, the Wounded Warrior Battalion, you can't say that, because they're trying to overcome their injury, their illness, their disability. So you have to find a balance in that. And so that's what I was able to do while I was there.
Well, when we talked the other day, we talked about what you took your mission to be when you were at the Wounded Warrior Battalion. And tell us what that was.
My job was to ensure that that we created an environment where the Marines and sailors that were there could heal, right? Our mission was recovery to get back to the operating forces, or recovery to leave the Marine Corps or the Navy as productive members of society. So we had transition specialists. We have so embedded in the battalion, you have transition specialists. Their focus is on doing resumes, getting internships, relying on the Marines or them to get the Marines to be when they transition. A lot of times we had the Marines that had mental health issues, and then they had some type of misconduct, right? My focus was getting them when they separate to make sure that they had medical when they left. All right. So if they a lot of people would say that, we have a zero tolerance to drugs. We do, but is it the mental health that caused them to do it? Is the PTSD that caused them to do it soothing? Or, and so what I would do is I would look at it as with a broad stroke and say, okay, this Marine needs medical when he leaves. And so I want to make sure, because if they get an other than honorable discharge, they're not going to get medical. All right. So I would recommend a general or an honorable discharge based on whether or not I found it to be a misconduct. We have the adaptive sports program. We have coaches that coach wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, sitting volleyball, swimming, track. We have other recreational sports. We take them rock climbing and stuff like that for confidence building. Because a lot of times when these Marines and sailors get these injuries, they lose self-confidence. So a lot of the stuff we do is all confidence building.
And you told me that a lot of the coaches there are really notable. They've had a very interesting career themselves, and so they get the best of the best when they're under your care.
Right. So yeah, so our coaches are prior Olympic coaches. Our athletic trainers are prior Olympic trainers. We have prior trainers that worked at like the US Open. And then one of our swim coaches was asked to go, he just went to China last fall to coach a adaptive Paralympics team. So that's the notoriety that is there at the Wounded Warrior Battalion.
Talk about some of the statistics that you were dealing with, and what were you doing to prevent those in your care from becoming part of those truly upsetting numbers?
Again, what we discussed previously, have 22 veterans a day commit suicide. All right. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this interview is to bring awareness to that. I know we have a whole slew of things going on in the world today, but we have people that have dedicated their lives to this country, and they're committing suicide by the number of 22 a day. And so I just wanted to bring awareness to that, because my focus at Wounded Warrior Battalion was to make sure that the Marines and sailors that were leaving the battalion, whether they went back to the operating forces or to the civilian community, they had the tools to deal with the injury, the illness, the mental illness, the PTSD, that they could cope and deal and take care of themselves and not be one of the number and not be counted as a statistic.
Well, are there any specific stories you can share about recovering soldiers that have touched you in any kind of way?
The one, and I'm get a little bit of anguish and tear up a little bit, because the one that comes and is close to my heart is we have organizations that come in and bring Christmas gifts for our Marines and sailors during the holidays. And at one of these events, there was a prior PFC's a veteran now, a double amputee in a wheelchair. And I was talking to him, and I asked him if he was going to sign up for the Marine Corps trials. And the Marine Corps trials are our equivalent to the Paralympics. And he indicated that he wasn't going. I was like, you know what, when we're done here, you're going to go over there. They're signing up. Go there, sign up, put your name on the list. And he did. And after the fact, I found out that he was one that was contemplating suicide. And today that has changed. I mean, I'm getting a little teary-eyed because that has changed his life. And during the Marine Corps trials, he won probably about 15 medals in cycling and wheelchair rugby and wheelchair basketball and sitting volleyball. You know, I mean, he just, and it sparked a new motivation in him. And so that was in the 2019 Marine Corps trials. In the 2020 Marine Corps trials, he was brought back as a coach. So that is something that is heartfelt for me because of the change. And when I first met him, I didn't know that that's what he was going through.
Well, not to toot your own horn, but you must feel like you were able to really have a meaningful interaction with not just him, but others during your time there. Must feel very rewarding at the end of the day to think that you might, because you might not ever know about the others, but every day you had a chance to interact with them and potentially save their life. And that's remarkable. Let's turn to your time now as a student at Redlands. Just before going there, as I mentioned, you were in the Navy Reserves. How did you end up at the university?
So I was in Arizona. I had been living in Arizona for a little bit. I went to a junior college there at Mesa Community College, and I ended up back in California. My choices were San Bernardino or Redlands, and I thought that I would get lost in the sea of people, you know, students at San Bernardino, so I chose Redlands. And Redlands was very good to me. And so when I speak to Marines and they're getting ready to go to school, I'm like, go be a bulldog, you know, so.
So I take it you look back at your time as an undergrad very fondly. You were involved in sports and other things on campus?
Yeah, I was a three-sporter, so I did cross-country, basketball, and softball, and the camaraderie in athletics at Redlands is just phenomenal. And I actually enjoyed my time as an athlete there.
Have you stayed in touch with anyone you were on any of the teams with?
I'm in touch with practically all of them.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Facebook is a great thing. It's an older thing now. Instagram is Facebook. How's that? I don't want to show my age.
There you go. There you go. Well, you've already got a master's degree. What made you decide you wanted another one, this time in organizational leadership?
As I'm transitioning out of the Marine Corps and retiring, you know, I have a master's in education, and I didn't know if I was going to go into teaching. Right. And so I decided to look at other degrees to get more experience. And when I found out that Redlands had the MSOL, you know, it appealed to me, and that's why I came back. And also, you know, they did the rate for the tuition assistance for active duty, so I couldn't pass it up.
Before we end, I want to ask you about some of the mottos or philosophies you must have dealing with everything that you have in your career. Can you share with us some of what those might be?
My first one is do right and fear no one. You know, because if you're doing the right thing because it's the right reasons, if you're just doing the right thing, there's no reason to fear any retribution or anything like that. So do right, fear no one. Of course, semper fi, you know, semper fidelis, always faithful. You know, the tenets that we live by in the Marine Corps: honor, courage, and commitment. So
excellent. Well, I hope you're staying safe and healthy during these unprecedented times. Everything is so much more difficult now than it used to be. But it was so great to talk with you and learn about your career. And I hope you will come back in 180 days and we'll talk about how life is like after retirement.
And then I'll give you some endorsements too.
There you go. It's a deal. It's a deal. Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Mary Flatley, for being on the program. Thank you as well for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Evan Sanford, and this is Inside the Studio.